Well, agriculture very much is on the front pages. The Prime Minister has toured drought-affected areas. Unfortunately for him in the photos, it was raining at the time, but we're told that doesn't lift a drought formally. We'll talk now to the Shadow Agriculture spokesperson, John Fitzgibbon, about it. Thanks for being here.
It's a pleasure. I'm not sure it was fortunate or unfortunate.
Well, unfortunate for the PR, but fortunate for the farmers, I suppose. But sometimes when that happens and you get a drought that's broken by too much rain, because of the ongoing drought, it then can create greater likelihood of floods, can't it? Because of the level of dryness.
But that's not the question here. Unfortunately, as heavy as the rain seemed, that downpour will go nowhere near toward breaking this drought.
Why is that? I mean, I'm not obviously a farmer. You'd be surprised to know that.
They need 100 mils in a week and more in the week after, and the week after that. It's so dry. So yeah, it looked heavy, and it was heavy, but only for short duration. It won't be enough.
Okay. Now, straight to the point. Are you going to pass this through the Senate, this package that Tony Abbott's put forward?
Well, we don't know what the package is.
Oh, come on, you do.
Well,
there's been an announcement. They've given us some details.
What's the package?
Well, yeah. No, I'm interviewing you, thank God.
The Prime Minister, you know, he's empathising with the farmers. That's good. He did the tour. That's good. He now realises, or he says he realises, something needs to be done. He's sort of danced around and talked about the sort of things he's thinking about, but we have had no announcement. But yes, I have been extending bipartisan support for weeks, obviously.
Yeah, but hang on.
I've
got my notes now. So the Abbott government package, add 280 million to the existing 420.
No, he hasn't said that.
Lower the rate from 5% to less than 4.5%.
He hasn't said that. These are controlled leaks going into the media. I think some of them come from Barnaby Joyce, the minister. But
okay, well, if they're
none of those words have ever past the Prime Minister's lips.
Okay, but let's put that to one side.
Okay.
Assuming that these leaks are more than just scuttlebutt, yes. Adding 280 million, lowering the rate to 4.5% or less, 10-year repayments rather than 5-year, and a 2 million limit on debt each farmer can refinance, up from 650k. Is that a package you would support?
All basically things I've been calling upon them to do over the course of the last few weeks. Although I do make the point...
So if that's what the package is, you'll pass it?
Well, we had a $420 million farm finance package. That's a package which gives debt relief to farmers. And they're talking about adding to that now and making the test more liberal. We support that. Unfortunately, so far, all they've done is taken $40 million out of that package. So we'd welcome more expenditure on farm finance. We think that's a good way to deliver some relief.
Okay, but in other words, your inclination will be to pass the package.
Absolutely.
Simple
My inclination is to support, I mean, you've got to put some caveat on these things, but our inclination is to support whatever the Prime Minister decides to do to help farming families who are in crisis.
Okay, let me come from another direction on this. Should there be some economic liberalism in the thought process about this? Because some farmers, Judith Sloan talks about it today in The Australian, some farmers are what you might call unsustainable farmers. Yep. Should they really be propped up? Yes, drought conditions, but no, perhaps because it's not the kind of farming that is realistically achievable without assistance.
Well, my view on, if you like, industry welfare is that the first answer should always be no, and then you look at these things on a case-by-case basis, and I think there's some very powerful arguments for intervening in agriculture. We, in fact, designed the farm finance package so that it only went to those who could prove that in the absence of drought or whatever the other intervening event might be, they had long-term viability. That's the whole idea, yes.
Is that the one that Barnaby Joyce is concerned wasn't signed off on by the states yet? I mean, there's a suggestion coming here out of the government that this was sort of half-baked as a package despite a long-term drought before they got into office.
Not true.
Why not?
There was one state not signed off on before I left office, and that was Western Australia, simply because they were looking at a different way of spending it.
When you talk to the government, they rattle off more than that in terms of the states.
That's not true.
Untrue.
When I became Minister in July, it was true that we were yet to sign final agreements with each of the states. By the time I left office, Western Australia was the only outstanding state.
Okay. Can I just ask on a complete side issue to the drought? Do you, in hindsight now, looking back, and you weren't the minister at the time, do you concede that the suspension of the live cattle trade was probably one of the biggest, outside of natural disasters, one of the biggest disasters for farmers back then?
Well, I did travel to the Beef Forum in Mount Isa before all those cattlemen, the beef producers, as minister, and I said it was highly regrettable, the pause. I did make the point, though, that there are many who will still argue that we would never have successfully implemented SCAS, that's the new supply chain which protects animal welfare, without the pause. So there are two arguments to the story, but look, it was highly regrettable. It did a lot of damage. and I look forward, not back.
Right, so when you say highly regrettable, if you were Minister at the time, you'd like to think you wouldn't have done it?
I'd like to think that if I was Minister at the time, things might have been done differently, yes. But, I don't want to criticise Joe Ludwig either, because these were heady times. You've seen the Four Corners report, you saw the community outrage.
But it was knee-jerk in hindsight.
Well, let me say this. I'm a great supporter of the industry. We need to make it sustainable, and it won't be sustainable in the absence of a certain level of community support. And ASCAS, that is the Supply Chain Assurance Scheme that protects animal welfare, it provides that community confidence, or I like to think it does. And again, some would argue we'd never have had it without the pause. But regrettable, damage done, I accept that. Kevin Rudd and I did a lot, I think, to repair that damage with the $60 million package when Kevin went to Indonesia. We're looking forward, not back.
Before we run out of time, looking forward, I've got to ask you about the polls. You know that. Out today, Bill Shorten's numbers have collapsed. He's still ahead of Tony Abbott, but that's hardly a surprise. He's always been unpopular. The size of the collapse is the issue, isn't it? I mean, at the end of the day, you've talked a lot about polls when you guys were in government. Bill Shorten's got to be careful here. That's a massive fall in the Nielsen poll on the back of last week's fall in the news poll.
Look, I just want to say, my criticism of Tony Abbott is not that he's talking about drought, but he refuses to put a package out. Farming families are going to bed every night still wondering whether there's going to be a package. On the polls, I'm not avoiding the question. I do note also that Bill was coming off a very high base. A very high base.
It's gone now.
That always makes for a bit of a fall. And as you say yourself, still ahead of Tony Abbott, which is a pretty good place to be.
Well, yeah, pretty good place to be. That's deeply unpopular. Being ahead of Abbott, it's like, you know...
No. An opposition leader being ahead of the Prime Minister of the day.
He's behind on the primary, he's behind on the two-party vote. And it's so early on. I mean, I guess where I'm going with this is I'm wondering whether, if ever there's a time for a party to think about whether it needs to recalibrate its message, it's now. It's after a heavy defeat at an election, a defeat that could have been even heavier by virtue of the style of the government leading up to that. You talked a lot about that at the time. Surely it's time, isn't it, for Bill Shorten, I'm not suggesting anyone undermine him, but surely it's time for Bill Shorten and people like yourself, senior shadow ministers, to get together and try to find what is it that you have to do differently from the last government to be able to go forward and do well.
And Bill certainly doesn't have to worry about, any threat to him, that is for sure. Look, that's right, you have to get the narrative right, but you've also got to stick to your principles. One of the mistakes the Labor Party made after the 1960 defeat is effectively walk away from the Hawke-Keating legacy in many senses, and that was very
But their legacy was a cracking economic legacy, whereas I don't know that you could say that about the Gillard-Rudd legacy economically. GFC aside, it was a different legacy economically, you'd have to say, to Hawke and Keating.
You can argue that, but where have we... Where has there been the opportunity to change that narrative? Where have we had the fight yet where we've had that opportunity? I mean, this is early days for Abbott, but early days for the opposition too, and we wouldn't expect to be in a particularly strong position this soon after such a strong defeat. We've got plenty of time to turn that around, and we will.
Okay, appreciate you being here. Thanks for your company.
It's a pleasure.